Hello, thank you for tuning in to my talk on Spitsbergen, land of the polar bear. My name is Paul Stanbury, and I work for the wildlife tour operator Naturetrek. And over the next 50 minutes, I'm going to be showing you some of the wildlife and scenic highlights of the Arctic islands of Svalbard. So where is Spitsbergen? Spitsbergen is located, it's the largest island in the Svalbard archipelago. Located about halfway between North Norway and the North Pole. Very easy for us in the UK to get to. It's just a flight from Britain to Oslo, overnight in Oslo, capital of Norway, and then up from Oslo on a direct flight to Longyearbyen, the capital, the administrative capital of Spitsbergen. So Longyearbyen is here on the southern side of Isfjord. And so Spitsbergen is the largest island in the archipelago, in the Svalbard archipelago. The other main islands being Nordauslandet up at the top, which has the third largest ice cap in the world, and the eastern islands of Barentsøya and Edgeøya. The wildlife and the landscapes of Spitsbergen is very much controlled by the ocean currents. And the Gulf Stream peters out along the western side of Spitsbergen, introducing slightly warmer water into this area. And the eastern side is more dominated by what's called the East Spitsbergen current, which comes down from the north, introducing very cold water into the eastern side of the archipelago. So the ice tends to hang around more during the summertime at the north and to the east, and the west of the islands are ice-free, even in the middle of the winter. So the cruises that we operate to Spitsbergen all start in Longyearbyen, and most tend to do a circumnavigation of the island of Spitsbergen, but this will depend on the ice conditions at the time of the cruise. We operate our trips in late June. At this time, the ice is normally melted sufficiently to allow us to explore the north and east of the islands, but there's still ice around, so you can head out into the pack ice to go in search of the polar bears and the other wildlife that we really want to see. So this is Longyearbyen. This is the administrative capital of Svalbard, and all of our trips, of course, start in Longyearbyen. You get a couple of hours to wander around the town before boarding the ship. And even when you're in Longyearbyen, there's still some really interesting wildlife to see. There are plenty of Arctic terns up here, fresh from their other summer down in Antarctica. This is some of the most northerly breeding Arctic terns anywhere in the world. Purple sandpiper is the commonest wader in the whole of Svalbard, and they're often seen feeding along the muddy shorelines and the marshes on the edge of Longyearbyen. Occasionally, grey phalaropes are seen in the town as well. The commonest passerine up here is the snow bunting, and snow buntings breed in Longyearbyen. In fact, Longyearbyen is probably the best place in the whole archipelago to see this attractive little bunting. But the main reason for our trip up to Spitsbergen is to join a small ice-strengthened ship. This is the ship we've been using over the past few years, the MS Quest. She only takes 50 people. It's an ice-strengthened hull, so you can head out into the pack ice, very comfortable, plenty of deck space to view the wildlife, and a range of comfortable ensuite cabins. It's also got enough zodiac, so everybody can head offshore onshore at the same time. So there's no need to queue as you have to on some of the larger vessels. And usually, ice conditions allowing, we head out of Isfjord and head north up the west coast of Spitsbergen to enjoy the landscapes and the wildlife. The west coast, say, is that little bit milder, so you tend to get very luxuriant tundra vegetation growing here. Home to an interesting variety of birds and other wildlife. The commonest goose is the barnacle goose. These are the birds that winter down on the Solway Firth at Calaverock in Scotland. The entire population of barnacle geese that breed in Svalbard winter down at Calaverock, and they're commonly seen throughout the archipelago. There are plenty of common eider around, and you need to sift through the common eider just to check to make sure there aren't any king eider amongst them. And the kings breed up in Svalbard, but even by the time of our trip, say late June, early July, a lot of the males have headed away and are heading out heading out to molt for the summer. But if you're lucky, hopefully we'll see 2 or 3 or maybe more of these amazing sea ducks. The most sought after wading bird of the high Arctic is the beautiful grey phalarope, and these are common in Spitsbergen. They nest on the little marshy tundra pools that dot the western side of the islands. Of course, the phalaropes, the 3 species of phalarope exhibit role reversal, whereby the female is the brighter of the pair. She will display to the male, and once the eggs have been laid, the female disappears and leaves the male to incubate the eggs and to rear the chicks. So it's quite unusual to see a family grouping of phalaropes as we have here, with the female in the background and the male in front, and then the chicks down in the bottom left corner. Normally, by the time the chicks have hatched, the females have left. On the tundra nest Arctic skuas, great skuas, and also the beautiful long-tailed skua. There are a few pairs of long-tailed skuas in Spitsbergen, and we know a couple of breeding areas, so we'll make sure the groups get to see this amazing bird. There aren't that many pairs. Long-tails tend to feed on lemmings in places like Norway, Greenland, and there are no lemmings in Spitsbergen. During the brief summer months, the tundra becomes awash with a wonderful kaleidoscope of different flowers, and it's a really interesting place to visit for those interested in botany, as well as the birds and the land and the landscapes. And on our cruises, we always make sure that we have a botanist along. So if you are interested in botany, there'll be somebody there to tell you the different species to look out for. This is purple saxifrage, beautiful boreal Jacob's ladder. There are 2 species of land mammal in Svalbard, the Arctic fox and the Svalbard reindeer. And reindeers are common throughout the archipelago. You may only get maybe 20-25 species of bird on your trip around Spitsbergen, but what the islands lack in diversity, they more than make up for in sheer numbers of individuals. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of breeding pairs of Brunix guillemots and little auks. These are Brunix guillemot colony. Close up here are the Brunix with its characteristic white stripe along the bill line. Millions of pairs of little auks breed in Svalbard, and one of the real highlights of a trip up here is the opportunity to visit a colony of little auks and have these wonderful birds chittering and cackling away next to you. And if you sit down quietly on a rock, within minutes you're surrounded by these wonderful little tennis ball sized birds. They're one of the most abundant breeding birds in the whole of the Arctic. And wherever you've got colonies of seabirds, you need to keep your eyes open for Arctic foxes. And in the summer months, they tend to focus their attention on the seabird colonies, scavenging on eggs and chicks. And in the winter months, they head off into the pack ice and follow polar bears and scavenge around polar bear kills. So as well as the wildlife, the landscapes up here are absolutely spectacular. Huge glaciers coming down to the sea, wonderful jagged mountains. We time our trips, say for June, July time, in the peak of the Arctic summer, but a time hopefully when the ice would have melted sufficiently for us to explore the islands in depth. If you go too early in the season, then you risk being stranded by the ice and being unable to explore some of the key areas because there are too much ice around. On this map here, which was taken 6th of May, which illustrates the ice on the 6th of May last year, anything in red and orange the ships just can't get into, so most of the islands were inaccessible at that time. But hopefully the ice would have melted sufficiently to allow us to head out into the pack ice, and once we round the eastern side of Spitsbergen, the temperature cools and there's more more ice around. So we head out into the pack ice, and one of the joys of having a ice strengthened vessel is the opportunity to be able to head out into the ice. And out here you get to see some of the really exciting Arctic wildlife. There are plenty of ivory gulls, pure white gull that lives out in the pack ice, and like the Arctic foxes, often spend the winter time following polar bears and scavenging off their kills. There are plenty of seals out here. Three species of seal are commonly seen. The smallest is the ringed seal, the middle is harp seal, and this here is the largest, the bearded seal. But wherever you've got plenty of seals, then you're looking for your polar bears. And there are about 2,500 or so polar bears that wander the ice between Spitsbergen and the neighbouring islands of Franz Josef Land. And whilst nothing guaranteed in the world of wildlife watching, you do stand a very good chance of seeing this amazing creature on a cruise. Hopefully out in the ice, out in its realm, sometimes on land, if they're unable to find an area of ice to hunt on. The bears are wonderfully photogenic. Each has its own individual character. So one bear might take a look at the ship, turn around and disappear off into the distance. Others wander up, very inquisitive, and will wander right up to the side of the vessel to take a look. Cubs, hopefully, as well as adults as well. The other big Arctic animal that people really want to see is the walrus, and there are a lot of walruses, fortunately, around the islands of Spitsbergen, very heavily hunted in the 17th, 18th centuries, but the population is now slowly picking up, and will take you to visit a walrus haul out on a beach, and you should see them in the water as well as we're cruising around. As with the walruses, the cetaceans were very heavily hunted in the 17th, 18th centuries. Sadly, a lot of them were almost wiped out. But again, numbers are slowly picking up over the years. Beluga whales are frequently seen on the voyage. We're looking for them mostly in the deep fjords on the eastern side of the archipelago. Since we saw our first blue whale back in 2008, the numbers of blues have been increasing year on year, and we're now seeing them most years on our cruises around Svalbard. Of course, the largest animal thought to have ever inhabited the Earth. Amazing creatures to see. Just two of the stats I always remember about blue whale is their heart is as big as a Volkswagen Beetle, and some of the arteries are so large that a 3-year-old child could swim down them. So these are massive creatures, and of course are a real highlight of a cruise. And there tends to be a few animals often hang out at the mouth of Isfjord. So as we're heading out at the start of the cruise and heading back at the end, we need to keep our eyes open. One animal, though, we don't stand much of a chance of seeing, but we may be lucky, is the amazing bowhead whale. These used to be super common up in Spitsbergen, but they were targeted by the whalers back in several hundred years ago, and there are now really less than 100 animals between Spitsbergen and Franz Josef Land. So they are more commonly seen over in the eastern Franz Josef Land, but we have been lucky on one previous voyage to have seen bowhead on a Naturetrek cruise. And as well as the wildlife and the scenery, you can't ignore the history in Spitsbergen. It was a jumping off place for a lot of the early explorers on their trips up to the North Pole, most of which sadly failed rather than succeeded. But one that did succeed was the Amundsen-Ellsworth Nobile transpolar flight in 1926, which took off from Ny-Ålesund on the northwest coast of Spitsbergen and was the first flight over the North Pole. They landed eventually in Alaska. So we'll show you a bit of the history of Spitsbergen as well as its amazing wildlife. But really, it's the opportunity to explore one of the few untouched places left on this planet. Wonderful scenery, wonderful variety of wildlife, and of course 24-hour daylight in the summertime. So when we're up there in June, the sun never sets, and this is the lowest the sun will get in the sky during your entire voyage. So the only problem is finding the opportunity to get some sleep. So I will end there. Say wonderful islands, spectacular landscapes, and amazing wildlife. So please do join us up in Spitsbergen in 2021 or 22 or beyond. We run our trips every year. We take, I should have mentioned, we take full charter as well of our vessel, so everybody on board is a key naturalist interested in wildlife, and we look forward to welcoming you on board sometime in the future. So thank you for listening, and if you want any more information on our Spitsbergen or any of our other holidays, please visit www.naturetrek.co.uk. Thank you very much.